Everybody, this is Perch, and I, I you know, I kind of I get the struggle that I think a lot of writers have when they come in and they work on comic properties that are, hero properties typically that a Marvel or a DC would have. If you're a writer and it's like, hey, I'm coming in to do Spider-Man, you're kind of being put in a weird spot. You simultaneously are like, hey, you need to do something engaging, you need to do something that's going to bring in a lot of readership. You need to make your mark on this title. But by the way, also, you can't break the title. You can't change it too much. It needs to still resemble what it always had. And by the way, the character has been fully formed over decades and decades and decades of comics. And so if you move from any of that, you're doing it wrong. By the way, this is a publisher telling the writer this, not the fans. I mean, that's a whole other dynamic here. But it is tricky, right? And that's where a lot of creators say, I'll save my best ideas for the indies, and that's where I have my own world and I can do what I want, and I don't have to kind of adhere to some writer from 40 years ago who making this one thing canon. I've got to deal with it, and it's just better to do it on my own. I totally get that. I mean, who wouldn't? Like that would be way more fulfilling creatively to be able to just do what you want to do on that page rather than have this long list of very strange rules that are both for the property and the character and the parent, and then God help you if you get a crossover and you got to deal with that. Like, how do you insert new things into one of these characters while still maintaining the fully formed personality of that character? It's a tough job. Now, I do think some creative people are good at that. I think that they have the right mentality. I would say an example, and this may not be the first name everybody thinks about, but I think Peter David historically was pretty good at being able to insert new things into characters while not breaking the existing pieces that were already there. I think he understood how to juggle it fairly well. I think several writers are, but there's definitely a personality type, I think, that either lends itself to this or doesn't. And if you don't have this personality type, I think then the world becomes a big struggle for you. And I think then you're coming in, you're like, I'm going to do my fresh new take, and I'm going to, just do something very, very different with the character. But very quickly, you find yourself at odds with, the fans who are wondering why you're screwing up the character, and ultimately with the publisher who is also wondering why you're screwing up the character. There's this belief, by the way, and you're not wrong, but I want to, I want to put this little twist into it. There's this belief that the publishers themselves, Marvel and DC, are purposefully ruining their characters, and this is where the words matter. Like purposeful, what do you mean by personal? Purposeful exactly. But in general, what the big publishers want is nothing and everything simultaneously. They want the character. They want to be able to, have the headlines in the Atlantic and USA Today about how bold and brave and daring they are and how impressive and wonderful. At the same time, they really don't want anything to change because change would, take away potentially their cushy jobs. It would require them to have to do a bunch of new marketing to redefine these characters, to explain what they are. I mean, these are all headaches. I've heard more than one editor complain that creators come and go, that the writers, I think they say they get to leave. It's a very weird way. Think about this for a moment. They say, well, the writer gets to come on the title, gets to do a bunch of things, maybe breaks the character, and then they get to leave. And I have to stay around and then try and make sense of it all for the next creator to come along. This was felt like whining, and it absolutely is. But process that in your mind for a moment of like this editor is like, woe is me. Writers are allowed to leave. It's like, well, you're paying them as freelancers. What do you think is going to happen? Like, yeah, they're allowed to leave. Very, very strange. I hear that, and by the way, in tech companies everywhere, if you ever like are in a management meeting and the managers are complaining about the ability of employees to quit, it's like they shouldn't be able to quit. Only we should be able to fire them. It's like, okay, that you're living in fantasy land now, sir. You do not know what you're talking about. But it is I am sympathetic to this dilemma of the creator who needs to make their mark. They need to do something new and different. People are tired of the same old storylines, the same old stuff. Don't rehash the same stuff. We need something new. and yet not too new, because if you do it too new and too different, the character is all screwed up, and then we got to redeem the character, we got to retcon it back out of continuity and all that kind of stuff. It's a hard problem. And I do the live chats every now and then. I think there's a person, Horizon Brave, who will come to some of the chats, and I think exemplifies some of this dynamic pretty well. Which is, I don't want to keep, why do we have to be this slave? I'm paraphrasing. I'm sure I'm not accurately conveying what that person's saying, but it's it is, why do we always have to go back to what was done before? Why do we have to be these slaves to continuity? It's getting in the way of telling good stories, and you're not wrong, but at the same time, you can't just dump all that out either, because these are existing properties. I think that's the part that a lot of people really struggle with, is that Spider-Man is not a blank canvas for any creator to just come in and do whatever they want. Spider-Man has 50 years of continuity, 50 years of background, 50 years of history. And while that 50 years may not be important to some people, it is important to others. And because Spider-Man is linked to billion-dollar box office franchise and a ton of licensing, and it's an important property for Marvel, the little teeny comics division can't just decide, let's just do whatever we want with Spider-Man and ignore all that history. You can't do it. You can't do it without causing severe financial and future growth potential harm to that character. That's a fact. You might want to, but you can't. And that's where the comics like Invincible, or all the number of different indie titles that are going on right now, that's where they have a huge advantage. They can tell whatever story they want. They absolutely can. Now, as Robert Kirkman himself kind of came to discover and learn and admitted, once you got 100 issues into The Walking Dead, the freedom he had started to go away. Now suddenly it's The Walking Dead. There's a TV show, there's graphic novel sales, there's books, there's media, there's video games, a lot of stuff going on with The Walking Dead. That freedom has vanished to some extent. And that's one reason why he's like, I'm calling it a day for the comic. I'm done. But also, and part of what is recognized in there is the property, The Walking Dead, had grown so far beyond the comic that he could go ahead and eliminate the comic, and it didn't matter to the growth potential of that property. It doesn't matter anymore. He's like, I to do new and creative things, I'm going to go do new and creative things. I'm just not going to keep going with The Walking Dead. It's fine. I applaud that decision. I think good for him. I think that's great. But if you're Marvel and you're DC, you don't have that option. And I think the weird struggle in the dynamic is that there are both creators and there's people within the company, and probably customers too, who really want just a brand new, fresh take on Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman or all this kind of stuff. They want it. They're like, I'm tired of the past. Kill the past. Let's go to the future. They're done. Sounds great. Cannot be done. Flatly cannot be done. It would be absolute suicide for a company to take an IP that is known around the world, one of the 10 most recognized IPs in the world, and say, you know what? It's all different now. As they will discover. I mean, look, it's like you want to experiment with having Tim Fox, Jace Fox as Batman. Cool. Okay, a black guy as Batman. Interesting stories you can tell. You tied it into continuity with the Fox family. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's cool. Interesting story. At the end of the day, you've got to revert Batman to something that is recognizable via the last, 60 years of brand building. Sounds so gross when you think about it that way, right? It's a brand. It's not just a comic. It's not a creative story. It's not whatever it wants to be. It's a brand. And the brand has financial value to it. And so it's interesting to experiment with this stuff. It's interesting to put out a headline that says, Batman's now black. Cool. We'll get some good stories out of that. That's great. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to go back to old, boring Bruce Wayne. It's kind of like the whole, he's not a billionaire anymore. He's now a millionaire. and we want to see a darker, grittier Batman and all the rest. This is a story that James Tynion's wanting to tell. Well, good for you. At the end of the day, though, his money is going to kind of be irrelevant. He's going to go back to being rich dude Batman with all his fancy toys, fights crime. Is he a millionaire? Is he a billionaire? Is he a trillionaire? I mean, who knows? I mean, at some point, as the head of Amazon and Bezos and these other guys get richer and richer, maybe we have to move Bruce Wayne up to being a trillionaire so he still seems like super rich. I don't know what is, but it's where a lot of these conversations you see on Twitter. It's like it's time to retire Bruce Wayne because the idea of a rich white playboy who's catting around the town looking for sex, that doesn't work. That's toxic, male privilege. You can't do it. It's like, let's check in about 10 years. I suspect we'll still be doing that. I don't know. Things do change and things do evolve. No doubt about it. But it's a game of inches. It's not a game of let's just move everything around. For existing properties. And if you're listening to this right now and going, I don't like these stuffy old characters, I don't like this stuff, well, good news. There are roughly 400 comics that are not the big two being published every single month. And you can go, check in on that, and you can inherit those properties. You can start reading them and all the rest of that. Cool. Maybe Marvel or DC gets lucky and they do an Ultimate Spider-Man where they introduce Miles Morales and it takes off the character and you got a brand new thing you can pay attention to. Cool. That can happen. But if you're really hoping that you simultaneously take this new, fully recognizable piece of brand, like, say, Spider-Man or Batman or Superman or whatever it happens to be, and you're going to take it and you're going to get all the advantages of it being super recognizable world over, but also change it entirely to be more contemporary and fit what you currently like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen long term. Doesn't mean people won't try, but they will fail. It always will go back to where it was, because it's not a living person. It's a brand. It's very, very established. My opinion anyway. Feel free to disagree. That's awesome. Let's hear your disagreement in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Check the description of the video for all the ways to get in touch with me, and harass me on other platforms. That's cool too. Thanks for listening.